Hey guys, Lord Naren White here, the Holy Ghost, the one true God. Back with you with the next video in my series reading Oliver Twist by Charles Dickens. Without further ado, returning to Oliver Twist as read by Lord Naren White. Ho ho there, cried a tremulous voice in the rear. Pincher, Neptune, come here, come here! The dogs, who in common with their masters seemed to have no particular relish for the sport in which they were engaged, readily answered to the command. 3 men who had by this time advanced some distance into the field stopped to take counsel together. My advice, or leastways I should say, my orders is, said the fattest man of the party, that we immediately go home again. I am agreeable to anything which is agreeable to Mr. Giles, said a shorter man, who was by no means a slim figure, and who was very pale in the face, and very polite, as frightened men frequently are. I shouldn't wish to appear ill-mannered, gentlemen, said the third, who had called the dogs back. Mr. Giles ought to know. Certainly, replied the shorter man. And whatever Mr. Giles says, it isn't our place to contradict him. No, I know my situation. Thanks my stars, I know my situation. To tell the truth, the little man did seem to know his situation, and to know perfectly well that it was by no means a desirable one, for his teeth chattered in his head as he spoke. You are afraid, Brittles, said Mr. Giles. I ain't, said Brittles. You are, said Giles. You're a falsehood, Mr. Giles, said Brittles. You're a lie, Brittles, said Mr. Giles. Now these 4 retorts from Mr. Giles's taunt, and Mr. Giles's taunt had arisen from his indignation at having the responsibility of going home again, imposed upon himself under cover of a compliment. The third man brought the dispute to a close most philosophically. I'll tell you what it is, gentlemen, said he. We're all afraid. Speak for yourself, sir, said Mr. Giles, who was the palest of the party. So I do, replied the man. It's natural and proper to be afraid under such circumstances. I am. So am I, said Brittles, only there's no call to tell a man he is, so bounceably. These frank admissions softened Mr. Giles, who at once owned that he was afraid, upon which they all 3 faced about, and ran back with the completest unanimity, until Mr. Giles, who had the shortest wind of the party, as was encumbered with a pitchfork, most handsomely insisted on stopping, to make an apology for his hastiness of speech. But it's wonderful, said Mr. Giles, when he had explained, what a man will do when his blood is up. I should have committed murder. I know I should, if we'd caught one of them rascals. As the other 2 were impressed with a similar presentiment, and as their blood, like his, had all gone down again, some speculation ensued upon the cause of this sudden change in their temperament. I know what it was, said Mr. Giles. It was the gate. I shouldn't wonder if it was, exclaimed Brittles, catching at the idea. You may depend on it, said Giles, that gate stopped at the flow of excitement. I felt all mine suddenly going away as I was climbing over it. By a remarkable coincidence, the other 2 had been visited with the same unpleasant sensation at that precise moment. It was quite obvious, therefore, that it was the gate, especially as there was no doubt that the time at which the change had taken place, because all 3 remembered that they had come in sight of the robbers at the instant of its occurrence. This dialogue was held between the 2 men who had surprised the burglars, and a travelling tinker who had been sleeping in an outhouse, and who had been roused together with his 2 mongrel curs to join in the pursuit. Mr. Giles acted in the double capacity of butler and steward to the old lady of the mansion. Brittles was a lad of all work, who, having entered her service as a mere child, was treated as a promising young boy still, though he was something past 30. Encouraging each other with such converse as this, but keeping very close together notwithstanding, and looking apprehensively round, whenever a fresh gust rattled through the boughs, The three men hurried back to a tree, behind which they had left their lantern, lest its light should inform the thieves in what direction to fire. Catching up the light, they made the best of their way home, at a good round trot, and long after their dusky forms had ceased to be discernible, the light might have been seen twinkling and dancing in the distance, like some exhalation of the damp and gloomy atmosphere through which it was swiftly borne. The air grew colder as day came slowly on, and the mist rolled along the ground like a dense cloud of smoke. The grass was wet, the pathways and low places were all mire and water. The damp breath of an unwholesome wind went languidly by, with a hollow moaning. Still, Oliver lay motionless and insensible on the spot where Sikes had left them. Morning drew on apace, the air becoming more sharp and piercing. As its first dull hue, the death of night, rather the birth of day, glimmered faintly in the sky. The objects which had looked dim and terrible in the darkness grew more and more defined, and gradually resolved into their familiar shapes. The rain came down thick and fast, and pattered noisily among the leafless bushes. But Oliver felt it not, as it beat against him, for he still lay stretched, helpless and unconscious on his bed of clay. At length, a low cry of pain broke the stillness that had prevailed, and uttering it, the boy awoke. His left arm, rudely bandaged in a shawl, hung heavy and useless at his side. The bandage was saturated with blood. He was so weak that he could scarcely raise himself into a sitting posture. When he had done so, he looked feebly round for help, and groaned with pain. Trembling in every joint, from cold and exhaustion, he made an effort to stand upright, but shuddering from head to foot, fell prostrate on the ground. After a short return of the stupor in which he had been so long plunged, Oliver, urged by a creeping sickness at his heart, which seemed to warn him that if he lay there, that he must surely die, got upon his feet and essayed to walk. His head was dizzy, and he staggered to and from like a drunken man. But he kept up, nevertheless, and with his head drooping languidly on his breast, went stumbling onward, he knew not whither. And now, hosts of bewildering and confused ideas came crowding on his mind. He seemed to be still walking between Sikes and Crackit, who were angrily disputing for the very words they said, sounded in his ears, and when he caught his own attention, as it were, by making some violent effort to save himself from falling, he found that he was talking to them. Then he was alone with Sikes, plodding on as on the previous day, and as shadowy people passed them, he felt the robber's grasp upon his wrist. Suddenly, he started back at the report of firearms, then rose into the air. Loud cries and shouts, lights gleamed before his eyes. All was noise and tumult, as some unseen hand bore him hurriedly away. Through all these rapid visions there ran an undefined, uneasy consciousness of pain, which wearied and tormented him incessantly. Thus he staggered on, creeping, almost mechanically, between the bars of gates, or through the hedge gaps as they came in his way, until he reached a road. Here the rain began to fall so heavily that it roused him. He looked about, and saw that at no great distance there was a house, which perhaps he could reach. Pitying his condition, they might have compassion on him, and if they did not, it would be better, he thought, to die near human beings than in the lonely open fields. He summoned up all his strength for one last trial, and bent his faltering steps toward it. As he drew nearer to this house, a feeling come over him that he had seen it before. He remembered nothing of its details, but the shape and aspect of the building seemed familiar to him. That garden wall, on the grass inside, he had fallen on his knees last night, and prayed the two men's mercy. It was the very house they had attempted to rob. And we'll go ahead and stop there for this week. As usual, I want to say thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. Please like, comment, and subscribe, as it greatly helps the channel. Light be with you all. Take care, and thanks again.